If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 30. I just turned 30.
Dude, you're living my dream, man.
How's that?
Dude, you're immersed into regenerative agriculture. I've agriculture I've been a part of my entire life, but very conventional. My family owns land out here in Texas, and we raise cattle and grow hay and that good stuff, but very conventional. And when I learned about sustainable methods, regenerative methods, whatever buzzword you want to title it, I went and asked my family about them. And I think the first question I asked was about no-till methods. I was like, hey, have you, what about no-till methods? And you would have thought that I told them that I was about to start doing crack cocaine or something, man. They were like, what the hell are you talking about? You're crazy. So how did you, or were you born into agriculture? You've been a part of it your entire life?
No, no, not at all. That's a good question. I was not. I'm the second of four kids. All of us were homeschooled. And so we lived a very different life, a life very similar to the one that my kids live today. Very wild, very free, not a lot of school-based order, if that makes sense. It's just there's no difference between a Monday and a Sunday and a Saturday and a Tuesday. And it's just life, and you go through it. But my father, he was an entrepreneur. Grew up on 30 acres just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. Absolutely not an agricultural landscape in the slightest, but 30 acres nonetheless. And then later in life, I'm skipping through a bunch of my story, but later in life, ran into a lot of illness. I was diagnosed with a bunch of degenerative genetic diseases. I've had all of my limbs taken off and put on my body, and I spent years relearning how to walk. Just a bunch of really crazy medical issues. And about 7 years into that journey, I was no better. I had lived in hospitals, traveled all over the country. Like I said, had some serious surgeries, underwent some serious diagnostic procedures, etc., and was no better. I weighed 135 pounds in this moment. And I sit here today like 190, and I feel pretty good. I was a really good football player, national champion wrestler, if you will.
Oh,
I weighed 235 pounds, I think, was like my playing weight, if you will. And I weighed 135 pounds in this moment. And I'll never forget, my mom walked out of the back sliding glass door. Again, I'm skipping some aspects of the story, but she walked out. I'm pretty much a physical vegetable in the back porch 7 years into this health journey. And she said, we've tried everything, but we've never tried chickens. And I giggled, I laughed, like, what the hell is a chicken? And I mean, like, what does it have to do with this story? And she said, we have long passively searched for health. We went to doctors and I mean, functional medical doctors, Eastern, Western, osteopaths, chiropractors, nutritionists, acupuncturists. I mean, Western surgical type doctor. I mean, like everybody in between. And she said that was very passive. What if we just stopped and became very active in our search for health? What if we just started farming our own food, just being a part of the system? Like stop trying to go to the system to have help, but like become a part of the natural world, right? Like what if that change in lifestyle or whatever it would be? So that day, I'll never forget. My wife never lets me forget. She was off working full time, and she got home, and I told her, I said, Morgan, we're farming now. We bought 100 chickens with my mom. And to her unbelievable credit, she said, yes, let's do it. Just no rabbits. She promised me we would never get into rabbits. So 10 years later, whatever it's been, still no rabbits. But again, long story short, there's a lot of nuance and complexity. But we started raising chickens, and then we started a veggie garden. And then we started to realize that you can't grow all of your own food unless you're just hyper dedicated to it and very isolationist. Unless you really have to. And so we started to befriend local farmers and start to buy from the local farmers market. And then we started to have some health. And then we started to fall in love with the people providing that health, the farmers, not the doctors. And then we started working on different farms. And then we started working on this one farm in Northeast Ohio, just south of Cleveland, that were running about 200 head of cattle. And we realized that chickens and veggies and just that side of agriculture was not interesting to us. We love cows. We love big ruminants. We like open rangeland. And it's an interesting, I'll provide you this little tidbit. This is just a huge part of our story. When we started working for that ranch, the 200 head cow-calf pair, 100% grass-fed and finished, holistically managed, truly regenerative farm, they couldn't pay us. They couldn't pay either Morgan and I to come out and help them tag or move or build fence line or something. And so they offered us organs and bone broth or organs and bones as payment. So like now, not just was I living a very different life, I was a computer developer at the time, just very static, in place on a computer. I went to college for mathematics and computer science of all things, and that was the paradigm and the life and the worldview that I existed in. And now I'm in these fields with these hundreds of cattle, and they're giving me organs and hearts and tongues and kidneys and livers and bones and marrow, and it's like just a totally different lifestyle, totally different diet, and life started to return to my own body, my own soul, and then life and its divine wisdom brought us to Central Virginia. What felt like a world away, land opened up. We've got about 400 acres here for less than you can buy 5 acres in Ohio for. And we moved. We found it and moved in a period of 2 weeks. My wife was pregnant. We lived on the floor for like 3 or 4 months during the third stage or the third trimester of her pregnancy. Again, something else that my wife never lets us forget. And to her credit, she did and did very finely well. But that's our story. I mean, I skipped over a lot of details, but generally speaking, no, we are not agricultural. This was new to us. And I have to say, because I do a lot of podcasts and I'm so excited to do this one. I love conversations and I think there's a lot of abundance there and it's really exciting. But I do a lot of podcasts and I will say most of my beliefs, which have started to really inoculate our work and all of the different sides of our life, are I would used to call them iconoclastic. Now that's not good enough. I call them truculent. Truculent is like quick to fight. I think that's what they are. And so I will tell you the way in which we perceive agriculture, I think, has been imbued with the story that I just told. We are new to it. We come at it from a perspective of life or death. Like literally, I was on the pathway of death. And to some large degree, in some aspect, it truly saved my life. We are new. We don't have long paradigms that need to be reestablished or broken down, then rebuilt, like you were saying about your family. Just long into agriculture, long into the cow-calf pair stockers, cattle, hay operations, whatever it is. We don't have those paradigms. And so when we came at the thing that is like truly having a relationship with Mother Earth, we didn't know what we didn't know, and we had all these questions, and that openness allowed us to emerge into a very new space, which I thought just made sense. I have now come to realize that there's a lot of people who disagree with us. So that's how I think we met too, this article that I wrote.
Yeah, dude.
But I'll stop there.
No, that was a fantastic background. So your health ailments, were they due to kind of conventional the Western diet? Is it stem from food or is there something else going on?
That's a really good question. We don't know. That's part of the 7-year journey, and why it was so arduous. There is some concrete, grounded type medical science to my issues, and a lot of that is malformation of the femoral heads in both of my legs. So like at the head of your femur is the ball and socket joint, right? That's your hip joint, hits your pelvis and such. My femoral head, so the head of my femurs, were squares, not circles when I was born. They don't know why. It could have been chemicals in my genetic legacy. It could just be a birth. We really don't know. And I think science has emerged since I've lost track of it. It does seem like it was new science at the time. And so I imagine it has emerged into a new question today. I've lost track. Maybe 5 years ago, I stopped caring. That was one aspect. It's interesting, though, like one part I skipped over is I have a very particular diet. And what we found is that, so I was a computer science and mathematics major in college, like I said, and there's a part of my brain that I hold on to that keeps computer science and mathematics very close. I don't keep it too close, and it doesn't occupy most of my brain nowadays, but it's there. And when I was really in the thick of it, my wife and I, we realized that a lot of my illness wasn't founded in food, but it was exacerbated or heightened by food. And so what we did for 2 years straight, I would journal. Like I have a journal here in front of me. I have many journals. I had a journal with me for 2 years straight, and I would document how I felt emotionally, spiritually, and physically 30 minutes before a meal, during the meal, and then 30 minutes after the meal. So
Wow.
physical, emotional, and spiritual check-in, self-understanding, if you will. And then we would next to that document the exact ingredients, the locations where we got those ingredients, and the grounds in which those ingredients grew. So this was a local tomato from whatever, this little blueberry, pick your own blueberry farm, and it was just blueberries, whatever. I'm making that up. Ketchup, right? It
Right.
was Primate Kitchen ketchup, and it was made with these five ingredients, and these five ingredients we think they've sourced around. Anyways, and then what we did 2 years later was I built this entire program, if you will, where it just was like a massive mind map, if you will. And what it did was it spat out 20, 21, whatever it was, 19 to 21 different ingredients. And I say ingredients because it was like local vinegar from heritage apples, right? Like something like that.
Right.
And 20 different ingredients that as long as I ate those exact foods from those exact sources, that I would be fine. And then we spent the entire next year building a diet off of that 20 food protocol. And that was 12 years ago. And since that journal went into the computer program and then came out with those ingredients, I've never, ever, ever consumed something outside of that, not intentionally. It's been 12 years. Everywhere I go, I bring my own food. We grow most of our own food. We develop relationships with the local people growing the local food. So, anyways, it's a huge complex system now. But outside of my wife, I have never eaten something that I didn't cook, or at least cook the majority of it. Um, like apple cider vinegar is obviously fermented apples in some sort of process with a SCOBY and mother vinegar. I didn't do that part. I let my friend do that part, but that's what I mean by mostly cook in for 12 years.
Huh.
And so there's a whole food component there. And I say this, and a lot of people, and again, when I do party, everybody kind of focuses on this part of the story, and it's a good part of the story, I realize. But I will tell you this. I will tell you this. I had a professor in college who asked me what a potato tastes like. So it was a very Socratic type class, like philosophy class, and he was like, "What does a potato taste like?" And at the time, I was like, "What a stupid question." What a stupid question. And that was my response at the time. And now when I think about it, not now as in this moment, but like over the last 12 years, I've increasingly gravitated to the beauty of that question. Like, I will tell you, I could tell you exactly what a raw, locally grown russet potato tastes like. It's not salty, it's not, bitter like with vinegars or ketchups, or like, to truly boil down life into so small of a little thing for your health is one thing. But then all of a sudden you start to create these relationships with it. And I it's horrible. It drives my wife nuts. But like she could be cooking, or I could be cooking my food, or she could be cooking their food, my wife and our three children's food, and I'm cooking my own food next to it. And I can, like, there's a smell, and the smell is off. And I'll say, Morgan, I'm not eating this. But it's the exact same, let's say, carrot from the exact same farm, like nothing's different. But it's that the smell is different. And there's been times where I've eaten that carrot, let's say, and it's gotten me really sick. And I've been sick for weeks on end. It just that's the penalty for misstepping the diet. It's quite atrocious. But it comes down to smell, because you start to have this unbelievable relationship to these things, and you start to understand what is potato. It's
Mm.
not bitter, it's not salty, it's not cooked, it's not oily, it's not fried. It's what is potato? And unfortunately, I feel like I can answer that question.
I've never.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I can't answer that. I'm thinking about every time I eat potatoes, it's with butter, or salt, or even some ketchup. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
can't have either of those three items. So,
no, not even like grass-fed butter, huh?
nope, nope,
Oh,
absolutely
interesting.
not.
Wow.
Not for 12 years. We once a month, or once every other month, we do a blind food test where my wife will throw in, a little bit of an egg white, or, the yolk of an egg, or a little bit of butter into a meal without me looking. And it has to be blind, else your mind and the dynamic neural pathways will allow it to get you sick when it's really not getting you sick. And there's, all that stuff. But it's blind, and she just throws it in. And I think we're at like 25 foods now. So in 12 years, we've added 4 or 5 foods. I think there's a lot out there that I could eat. What it really comes down to is like oregano, right? So like oregano is an herb. It's a really wonderful herb, But if I had to try a new food, I would rather try an egg, not oregano. I would rather try, milk from our cow than oregano. There's just a lot of things in front of oregano. I would imagine oregano is pretty good,
That's
but
interesting. That's a wild
anyways,
story, man. That your journey with health is just as compelling as your way with words, man. Your background, in mathematics, that's not what I was expecting. I was thinking more literature, like, because your
yeah,
your writing style, man, is really beautiful, and that's what
appreciate
prompted
it,
me
man.
to reach out. So, how long have you been writing?
It's a good question. Probably since my freshman year in college. I will tell you before this. So we were all homeschooled, as I said, and um, my brother, he's a PhD professor. My sister is a doctor. My other sister is smarter than all of us. So like we were all well educated, but I never gravitated towards like the intellectual side of my life. As I said, I was like big into sports, big into football, big into wrestling, and like that was always my passion. Like I remember my dad, who was like owned a couple businesses, entrepreneur type, and so he had the ability to be flexible with his time. He used to take me every single day to like this local gym from like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. just in the middle of the day, and we would lift, and then we would have some food, and then we would have this wrestling practice with like whatever, it doesn't matter. But so like I always lived over there, and then as soon as that left, it was my senior year in high school where all of the illnesses really started.
Hmm.
I lost all of my Division I college scholarships for football. Just like it literally was like black and white, one day and another, binary, right? Zeros and ones. That's exactly how it happened. I'll never forget. I'll share this with you. So like I Division I scholarships to any university you want to bring up, right? Is basically was what it was, and then it all on Monday they were there. On Tuesday it was completely gone, and just because of the severity of my illness and how fast it started. I'll never forget. It was Valentine's Day of my senior year. I had just gotten out of surgery. One of my hips had been taken out and messed with, put back on. And I got a phone call. And it was like 7 p.m. and I was laying in bed all by myself, very depressed, very much in pain, couldn't move, hadn't moved for weeks, still couldn't move. And I picked it up, and it was a college football coach from the Division III university. And I'll never forget. He's like, "Oh, you're the first person who picked up." And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, it's Valentine's Day. You must not, be attractive or something, whatever." He like totally just made fun of me, which was just made it all worse. And then he was like, "Hey, so like I hear you're not like, a Division I prospect anymore. We would love to have you at our school." And I said, "Well, who are you?" And they said, "We're such and such. We've been 0 and 12 for like a decade. And we're Division III. We can't offer you a scholarship, but we'll welcome you here. You can come." And the funniest part is I ended up going to that college. That's where I went. I didn't play sports or anything, but like divine. It was amazing how it worked out. But wait, right when that happened, to answer your question, I don't know if there was this um hidden love for books and writing that was always there but never expressed, or it just started then. But right around that time, I started reading and I started reading and I started reading. Then I started writing and loving words and studying different languages, and it just exploded from there. It was like sports left and immediately writing and reading.
Wow.
The intellectual side of life just, hit me just as hard.
There's something about homeschool kids. My daughter's friends with a couple of them, and they are just brilliant. And
A little weird.
I mean, maybe it just depends.
I
Like
can say that for myself.
I've met some homeschool kids that were probably homeschooled by their grandparents, so they were just around older people majority of the
Mhm.
time. So the way they talk and communicate is just it's not at their age level. It's just a little older. But these kids are just so smart. And I actually talked to this homeschool coalition organization from Texas, and he was spitting out some stats and facts that homeschool kids outperform public school kids just about in every test or measure that they can come up with. And that makes me want to homeschool my kids. I don't want to mess them up. I don't want to fuck them up. Like it's a lot of pressure. I struggled through college. I got a engineering degree, and I hate forced education. I love learning about things that I want to learn about, but I don't really sit well with forced education and or forced subjects. Like I just don't do well with that. I get antsy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's
yeah.
That's interesting. My mom, who's not highly educated at all. I mean, she's a wonderful, wonderful woman. Her dad was a fine carpenter, like just unbelievable cabinet maker type. And she inherited that. I mean, her ability to work with wood and use her hands is unprecedented, in my opinion. But she never really was intellectually learned. Never went to college, any of that. And it's interesting. My siblings, we talk about this quite often, especially at holidays when we're together. But like, so I went to college for math. I graduated as the top math student at the university. Basically, perfect GPA. Was a tutor for like Calc 3 and trig like any math class you want to think was a tutor for that or teacher's assistant or whatever. But in high school, the last math that I took at home was Algebra 1, which is like eighth grade level, and I did it my freshman year, whatever that means in homeschooling. You don't really have like freshman year, if you will. Um, but at home, she always pushed. Like we would read books and then she would force us, which ended up not really being forced, but she gave us the opportunity to do these things called tellbacks, where we would read a book and then we would have to tell back to her like what happened, and it sounds simple and very humdrum, benign, if you will, and it's not. It's absolutely not. Like she instilled in all four of or three of my siblings, all four of us total, this ability to learn and a love of learning. And so when I went to college and I was like, okay, I'll study math. Like I never, I didn't take geometry. I didn't take algebra 2. I didn't take, pre-calc. I never took calc. Like I don't know what, high schools learn today and for math, but like I never did any of it. Algebra 1 was the last thing. But I fell in love with it. And as soon as I fell in love with it, I had, 18 years worth of training on how to learn, like how to read a book, how to
Mm.
learn by yourself, how to determine the right book to read so that you can learn by yourself. All of these things were just implicit in our lives. And so, my brother, he went off to be a political scientist and he's a professor at Ashland University in Ohio now. My sister's a doctor. My other sister's an art student, um, or not an art student, an artist. She's a portraiture artist and unbelievably good at it. And then she decided to go to college and she graduated as like the valedictorian of philosophy or something. Like the point is like once you have the ability, right? And then you mix that ability with a love of the thing, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, opportunity doesn't exist everywhere, but it's a pretty good start.
So your mom was the main one who gave y'all the homeschool lessons.
Yeah, yeah. Now listen, my dad was heavily involved. I think, it's important to say. But on the day in, the day out, my mom was building the curriculum, whatever that means. She would make sure that the particular books were there, and my mom was helping us. We built huge history timelines on the wall. Like I remember my childhood home's schoolroom, we called it. I don't know, it was maybe 30 feet by 20 feet. It was a huge room. And there was just a historical timeline
Hmm.
from the beginning of the earth till now, from floor to ceiling, just around the entirety of the room.
Wow.
And so like once a week we would, or once a month we would pick Rome, Greece, Sumerians, like pre-Neolithic times, cave, art type, prehistoric, just whatever. And we would just study it and print out graphics and laminate them and put them on the wall.
That's
And
so awesome, man. Your
what,
way of thinking, dude. I bet it's not like my way of thinking is, and I'm trying to break out of that. It's very like in a box. Like this is the
mm,
system that I was born in, and this is the system that I'm raised in. And I'm trying. I like if I could paint myself, I'm like trying to like get out of this box. But I can see your brain working where it's just like there's it doesn't fit. It just makes it up as it goes, and it's very
I
that's
could use your box. Sometimes I could use your box.
I don't know, man. It's kind of a downer sometimes, but I want to break away from that, and it seems like I would be too stressed out about what curriculum I'm building for my kids. Um, if I'm doing it right, if I'm not doing it right. But when I talk to you, I've talked to so many people who have been homeschooled, and their stories are very similar to yours. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, we did it. We had fun doing it, and we had history one day, and then maybe math another day, and it wasn't so structured.
Yeah. I think there's a huge difference. I think, well, let me say it this way. In my adult life, if I realize an inadequacy in my learning, I just fix it.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If I don't understand a particular way, that X, Y, and Z works. I have the ability to learn. I have the desire to know this thing, and then you just go know that thing. Or like if I don't understand how, this Second Punic War between Carthage and Rome ended, as if like that really matters as a historical fact that you had to put on a test in eighth grade or whatever. I'll just go buy Livy's History of the Second Punic War. Like I'll just do that, and then I'll read it in my spare time. Like there's a difference between knowledge and this other thing. And I don't know what the other thing is or should be called, but it's what I believe schools really are trying to ingrain into you, right? Like sit at this desk, do these things. Now I went to high school for my sophomore year in high school for sports. That's a whole nother story. So I went to school for 1 year. It's where I met my wife. So like I'm pretty happy about it.
All right.
It was a good experience. I did ask her the first like time me and her ever truly interacted sophomore year in high school. This is still a joke between us. We have a lot of jokes, I guess, between each other. But I asked her if she wanted to see my history timeline.
That's a good pickup line, dude.
Do you want to see my history's timeline? My mom and I made it over the last 16 years. No, but I mean like so I went to school for a little bit, and like you sit in a class. You're right. You're sitting at a table. You can't move. If you're tired, you can't rest your mind. Like there's a lot of rigidity there. And don't get me wrong, rigidity is needed in some aspects of life. It's true. And maybe in homeschooling we have the over ability to just, screw rigidity up the ass. But if I had to pick one, I'm going to pick homeschooling over the rigidity any day.
Yeah, no, absolutely, dude. Well, it played well in your favor, man, because I was thinking like you are some PhD student, Harvard professor. The way you not only the way you wrote that first article that I read, but also I've been listening to your podcast over the last couple of days, and it's very, very good. Do you script that, or do you freestyle stuff?
No, that's the bane of my existence is I really am incapable of scripting anything.
Hmm.
Like, I was at the Force of Nature conference I keynoted. I was just so close to you. It's so sad.
Yeah, yeah.
I was just in Austin and in Fredericksburg a couple weeks ago keynoting the Force of Nature conference at Rome Ranch, and I wrote out the whole speech, and then I realized that I should not do that because I can't, like I'm a great writer, but when I speak, and even when I write, I still write it as though I speak it. Like my last book, I've written 3 books now, but the last book, Dark Cloud Country, I wrote via dictation. Like I didn't sit at a computer writing. I just spoke the book and it came into like, it's literally what people read. And now it's been edited. My editor and her gracious and infinite wisdom has fixed some of my errors. But that's really how I wrote it. So I'm just better at that side of life.
Hmm.
And so, I trashed the speech. I then gave the speech. The same things happened at every course. I'm teaching a course, an 8-day course in a couple days down in North Carolina. And like, I don't have a syllabus. I don't have notes. It's just going to be 8 days. And I got to get them to a certain spot because everybody leaves that course as a accredited professional at the Savory Institute. So like I have particular, end goals, very rigid end goals. But I thrive in that very spontaneous, uh, a very fluid and spontaneous place.
Yeah, it
And
comes off, man. It comes off as your real personality. It's very nice and attractive compared to some other people that are kind of in the movement, very scripted, very, bullet point list kind of talking points. And so your information that you put out, it's very nice. How is the
I appreciate
article
that.
being received by I imagine by one set of the population it's being received one way, but overall, I mean, how is it being received by the regenerative community?
Horribly.
Yeah.
Horribly. Very simply, the word is horribly. And that's exactly like I'm excited about that. I don't mean to say horribly in a negative way. It may be horrible for them, and that is negative. Um, but like, okay, so like, who are we? Very, very briefly, my wife and I, we run 400-acre farm. We call it Timsha Wildland. We don't call it a farm. We call it a wildland for reasons that we can talk about. Uh, and then we run what's called the Robinia Institute. And now the Robinia Institute, co-founded again by my wife and I, she went to college for biology, so she actually feels in place in our life. I feel completely out of place. Um, I'm more like my son, or our son. His name is Tecumseh, and we were just building fence today. And it's 400 acres. It's about a 1 mile square to a large degree. And we were out way in the back, literally like a mile away from home. We were building this fence, and this butterfly was flying around us. And he's 3. No, I'm sorry. He just turned 4. And he was just like his mind is so poetic and so story based and mythological. He was like talking to the butterfly, and like it was the butterfly's birthday, and he like I forget what the butterfly's name was, but he had a conversation with the butterfly. Like that's where my mind's at. I see butterflies and I talk to them. My wife, she sees butterflies and she's like, "Oh, that's a, common Buckeye butterfly, or that's a purple empress or whatever." And not that she doesn't think poetically or I don't think scientifically, but we're a good match that way. But what we both co-own and co-founded a thing called the Robinia Institute, and we speak and we travel and we write, and we do a bunch of things there. We manage a lot of land. We do a lot of land management, land transition, thousands of acres of corn, soy, and wheat over to perennial grassland and such. But a huge aspect of that, and the only reason I bring it up is to say this: we're also a hub of the Savory Institute. So our work is very, very, very closely aligned, and also like we work literally hand in hand with the Savory Institute, teaching holistic management, consulting with like whatever. And when I published that article, I can't give too many details, but basically they said no, like we're not sharing this. Like, it's not going to happen. And that's been the common thread throughout the majority of the article. I wrote this short little piece the other day on our Substack, which like I'm not a great salesman of myself, but we are really interested in getting more people on the Substack. And so like if this conversation is interesting to you and you want to listen to me more or listen or read some things that I'm saying, maybe show notes or something, it's just Denuding the Illusion Substack. You can find it anywhere. But I put this on the Substack recently that the article has bifurcated my life in like how I interact with certain people into two different sides. You have these angry, what I call them angry patriarchs, right? And these are the people yelling at me. And then we have excited participants. And I will tell you, after we wrote the article, an overwhelming number, mass of excited participants raised their hand. Right, they read the article and basically just from comments to direct messages to emails, got way too many emails of people just saying yes, like that's exactly what I've been thinking. I didn't have the words, or maybe it's exactly what I'm thinking. I did have the words, but I don't have the time to write it. This is exactly what I've been thinking. And then you had a fringe, a little faction of the regenerative world, which I think is the unfortunate streamline where regeneration is going, that we're quite angry. I call them angry patriarchs. They these are the type of people that they see the current system as good enough, right? They think the current story is good enough, right? Regeneration is better than the alternative, so why would we say anything negative about it? That's how they, one lady emailed me. I believe she was a lady, shouldn't say, and she said I was delusional, I think was the word, which just made me laugh. I'll be delusional. There's one of my favorite authors, John Ralston Saul. He wrote a book called Voltaire's Bastards, and he says, it's a rough paraphrase, it's almost an exact quote, I don't have a good memory, but he says, blessed is he whose clarity causes disquiet. So if that disquiet happens to just look like delusion, like that's good enough for me. Blessed is he whose clarity causes disquiet. I'll stop there. Maybe we can dive into the article or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so this whole regenerative movement, it's very inspirational. Taylor Collins was the first person that I spoke to when I wanted to learn about regenerative agriculture. And then I talked to a soil expert. I talked to Gabe Brown. I just went on, and the podcast started turning into like a agriculture podcast a little bit. So I kind of backed off a little bit, but I'm a very, and this is just my personality, I'm a glass is half empty kind of guy. I'll always see the negative side before I see the positive side. That's why my wife and I are a good pair, because my wife is like, she'll always see the positive side, and I'm like, well, there's this part too, and that's my negative side that I'm seeing, is that regenerative agriculture is almost being it's being taken over by these big businesses, large corporations, and it's being used in the same context of almost organic is now. And My fear is that it's going to be diluted, and it's not. It's going to be the next organic. So in my mind,
Right.
I'm kind of like, man, we shouldn't even call it regenerative. I don't know if we need to call it something, but I don't think it needs to be called regenerative.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So the article doesn't get into that latter part of the point you just made. But since the article has been published, I've been on three little cohort type calls. There's a lot of people that I keep around me that are much more intelligent and infinitely smarter than I am that I just keep close. And anytime I'm developing or thinking or just need to iron out a thought for a book or something, it's just Zoom call, right? Everybody comes in, Zoom call. And since the article has come out, I've had multiple, three, I think, of these Zoom calls where we're starting to play with this idea, or my mind is playing with it, and I'm dragging them into it. And I'm not entirely sure all of them want to be into it. The idea is a question. Is regeneration something we should reclaim or forget about? Okay, reclaim or forget about. We at the Force of Nature conference, I gave this as an analogy or metaphor is probably a better word. It's a really interesting time that we occupy. You two, you and I, us two, in this moment, within the greater context of the world's evolution, consciously, physically, doesn't matter. Climate change is at the door. Technocracies are busting down the door, right? Bill Gates is buying up farmland. We just got at the end of the COVID pandemic or plandemic, and there's conspiracy theories on both sides. It's a weird time. And it's not dissimilar, okay? And this is going to make sense in the end, I hope, but it's not dissimilar to 10 years ago when social media came to the fore. And when social media came to the fore, right, like you and I, MySpace, like you had like Napster, you had MySpace, and that was it, right? And all these things don't exist anymore. Or at least I don't know if they exist. I assume they don't. I don't know anybody on them or using them. I got Spotify and Facebook or Spotify and Instagram. But anyways, when social media came to the fore, there was a moment where we could have turned it. I'm not saying killed it. I'm not saying thrown it all away. But what I'm saying is we had a moment before it dominated our lives or grew to dominate our lives that we could have effected it in some way. If you and I want to sit around today saying that Facebook and Instagram or TikTok has way too much power, they're controlling the data, however the conversation unfolds, you and I will never win that. You can talk about it, right? It's just little thing you and I can do to have some fun, but that's it. That's as far as it goes. It is dominating our life at this point. Regeneration is at a very similar point. Regeneration right now as it stands has the ability to pivot, to be reclaimed or to be forgotten. But as it's running, it is running the same path that social media is running. And I'm not saying that agriculture and technology are these things that are intertwined, that Mother Nature and Mother Culture are working together. Like that's not the totality of what I'm saying. That might not even be true. But the point is this: regenerative agriculture was created to describe an agricultural paradigm, worldview that builds soil, doesn't decrease soil. It allows a living biodiversity, not decreases biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. Decreases erosion, etc. But as it sits now, right, we're surrounded by brands and labels and big players. Like I wrote in my article, Nestle, one of the top 4 food processors and food producers in the world, billion dollar company controlling what you and I put in our bodies. Everybody puts in their bodies, from third world to first world and everybody in between. Nestle has guaranteed that by the end of 2030, not by the end of the decade, but the end of the year 2030, right? 7 years from now, the entirety of their supply chain, or the grand majority of it, will come from regenerative farms. That's asinine. That's laughable, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? The entire existence of Nestle is an exact antithesis of what regeneration stands for, right? And this is the conversations that we've been having that, not really in the article of such, but like, I was talking to Gabe Brown. So you said you've talked to Gabe Brown, right? Thought leader in the space. For those who don't know, that he runs Understanding Ag and a number of different organizations. Truly, when it comes down to understanding the scientific, ecological, and biological thing that is regeneration, this is your guy, or at least this is in the handful of individuals that should be in that. He is right there. And I was doing a podcast with him the other day, and he looked at me just like I look at you, and he said, if you ship your food, if you grow it in North Dakota and ship it to South Dakota, If you ship it to the other county, you are not regenerative. You are not allowed to say you're regenerative, right? And so if Nestle, so if the thinkers of regeneration believe that regeneration happens in place, right? We can get all into the science, but let's just look at this very briefly. So a plant grows in the soil. We can understand this. The sun shines on the plant growing in the soil. No matter if you live in New York City or you live in the middle of nowhere, Central Virginia, an hour away from anything like we do, everybody understands this truth. The sun shines on a plant in the soil. Well, how that plant grows, right, is via photosynthesis. We know that. We've all learned that. At least to some of us, maybe homeschoolers learn that later in life. But we've all learned this. But when that plant undergoes photosynthesis, it's taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, releasing O2, oxygen, through its leaves. We call that transpiration, and sequestering the carbon, the C. So it takes CO2, splits it apart in this marvelous engine of a plant. God forbid I reduce the being of a plant to an engine, but in this moment, that's what it is. Sequesters the carbon, releases the oxygen. So plants undergoing photosynthesis in the soil, rooted in the soil, are sequestering carbon and providing the air that we breathe. So inhale, exhale, think a plant. But the weird thing about plants, and this is where our understanding lapses, and this is a lot of our educational work. Like next week, I'm teaching an entire 8-day course on this. Where our understanding lapses is this: in order for that plant to undergo that thing, carbon sequestration, transpiration for oxygen, photosynthesis, whatever you want to call it, it has to catalyze that energy via minerals. So minerals have to be in the soil for the plant to mine, like an excavator would mine the soil for copper. Or I was about to say, or a human for cobalt in the Congo. It's atrocious. We can talk about that another time. Just unbelievable. Plants have to mine the soil for minerals to catalyze the energy so photosynthesis can actually produce vegetation. So vegetation is the product of the catalyzation via minerals of photosynthesis's energy. I don't know if that's clear or not, but let it sit there. And so all of this has to happen in place, because if the plant grows via photosynthesis, making the air, sequestering the carbon, looking like a beautiful plant, let's call it a flower. Maybe it's a forb, call it crownbeard, a marvelous yellow flower, quote unquote native flower that grows out here in the Wildland Project. It can only do so by mining the minerals in that soil. But when it mines those minerals, the minerals grow up into the leaves. But if you take that leaf and you bring it over there, wherever there is, we have now decreased the minerals of the soil in which that plant grew, the original minerals, right? So if that plant, let's say crownbeard, needed phosphorus, and it needed one handful of phosphorus to grow, right? It took one handful of phosphorus in the soil. You then cut it and you sold it elsewhere. Let's say you shipped it from Texas to Virginia. And now 1 gram or one handful, of phosphorus exists in Virginia, but Texas lost one handful of phosphorus, right? And if we continue to do this, we continue to degenerate. The exact nature of the opposite of regeneration is degeneration, and its exact nature is the exportation of nutrients. Pick up a book by Greg Judy, read a Joel Salatin book, talk to Gabe Brown. In some aspect of their books, their writings, their speeches, their podcasts, their anything, you will see the phrase exportation of nutrients. Stop exporting nutrients. Regeneration is an ecological process that is also social because it has to exist in place. If you take any aspect of that process and bring it anywhere else, you are degenerating the place in which it grows. Okay, and so what I said in the article and what I'll say here is that monocultures, right, that push. So monocultures are a 1,000-acre cornfield, heavily sprayed, nutrient deficient entirely, from the things that are growing to the things in which provide the growth. Everything is deficient. Monocultures of thought, monocultures of land, all degenerate the places in which they are to then export those nutrients to go feed the world. So as long as we're focused on feeding the world, we will only kill the people doing it, kill the landscapes doing it. We can't operate under a different paradigm. And so I go back to Nestle. If Nestle is going to go into the rural landscape and force that rural landscape to start producing for the world, not the local landscape, right? Because for some strange reason, humans occupied in the local landscape have a seemingly interesting and very solvent way to feed each other. But when you go to the rural landscape, a local landscape, take the nutrients from that, export them to another country, another county, another aspect of the country, whatever that may be, we are destroying the nutritional and social and community and political poverty, or people into poverty of that landscape. Just like the plant, when it mined the phosphorus and you sold it elsewhere, um, destroyed the soil and made it impoverished for phosphorus.
Right.
Does that make sense? I'm trying
No.
to stay as high level as possible,
Right.
but there's an intrinsic relationship, okay? To say this very simply, there's an intrinsic relationship in regeneration to place. And anytime we extend that relationship out of place, we lose the intrinsic relationship, and we lose our understanding of the original thing, right? And so
Right.
now we're back to the question: should we reclaim regeneration, okay, or let it go? Like if Nestle believes they're regenerative, do you and I sit here saying, "Damn Nestle," right? Damn those people who ship their nutrients all over the world. Damn these big companies, buying from big ag, right? Like, what about the small guy? What about the crown beard over there in the corner, right, of your pasture where you didn't spray because it's a weed and everybody sprays it? It's the second most sprayed, most herbicided and killed and sprayed plant in the state of Virginia. Johnson grass is number one, crown beard is number two, but it survives over there, right? Like, damn that thing, we have to have 1,000-acre cornfield. Like
Right.
it's size, right? It's scalability. And if that is true, why are you and I sitting here arguing about it? Let it go. Or at least should we let it go? You can tell I kind of have made up my own decision, but it's still a question, right? Like, go ahead.
No, 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 absolutely. That question. So I set out last year to film a documentary, and one of the questions that I wanted to ask in the documentary was, can regenerative agriculture feed the world? That was kind of the my virgin way of looking at things when I first dived into this. And I'm still a virgin when it comes to this topic, but I've learned that I need to rephrase that question. It's like, should regenerative agriculture feed the world? And and the more I talk about it, and the more I listen to people and read articles, it's not like regenerative agriculture is supposed to feed their communities, not the
Yeah.
world. And I think that's kind of what you're arguing in the article, right?
Yeah, this is a paraphrase of a dear friend of mine, but I offer to you anyways. I don't know if your question is wrong. Okay, I think that the answer is simply there, and that this is my opinion. And again, a paraphrase from him, not completely my own thought. I believe that regenerative agriculture, and let's just cut out that term. I believe we, okay, I believe we can feed the world when we start to understand that we cannot feed the world.
Ooh. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
work with me, right?
Yeah.
Until we learn that we cannot feed the world, we can never feed the world. Okay? Because there's many facets here, many layers. So like biodiversity, everybody talks about biodiversity from a very linear construct, right? You have, and again, this is ecology, but you have bare soil and you have a forest, right? And biodiversity is this linear chain of succession that goes from bare soil to moss and lichen. Maybe you have some ephemeral plants that grow in there, and then you get to annual plants and low growing perennial plants, stolen, spreading annual plants or perennial plants, and you got bunch grasses. And then, anyways, there's a whole stage of succession. I think that whole thing needs to be burned, right? At the end of the article, I say, let it burn. That's one thing I would love to let burn. There's no such thing as this. Biodiversity, truly understood, is not a linear pathway, but a multidimensional sphere. It's a multidimensional sphere because in this sphere, we start to lose an understanding of time. Walk into a truly biodiverse setting. I can't even call it something, a field, a forest, because that doesn't exist. Walk into a highly biodiverse, a truly biodiverse setting, and you will not be able to tell me where you are. I mean, you can tell me you're in Central Virginia, you can tell me on a south-facing hillside slope, but is it a forb land? Like, is it a wildflower meadow? Because there's a fuck ton of those,
Hmm.
right? But no, there's trees everywhere. Oh, okay, but so we're in a forest now? No, 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 because there's perennial grasses everywhere. And you're like, okay, so we're in a field. No, but we have meadows. Okay, so we're in a meadowland, right? You don't have an answer, right? You are overwhelmed by the sheer complexity, and that overwhelm via complexity disallows you to understand time. Where are we in this evolutionary linear pathway? No, wrong question, right? So like biodiversity, it's the same thing that exists in the conversation I'm having right now about we cannot feed the world until we understand that we can't feed the world. We lose the understanding of time. In a truly biodiverse system, time is absent. It doesn't exist. We don't have the understanding of time and evolution. It just is. And it's always moving and undulating. And when we teach courses in all my books, this is always a phrase I put in there. I just think it's exactly what people need to hear. Maybe I'm wrong, but resilience is diversity and motion. So if you want biodiversity, what you don't want is static systems, right? But that's a lot of what regenerative agriculture is, right? You talk to a local regenerative farmer and they say one of two things. They say, "Oh, look at this! Look at my multi-species herd of cows and then sheep and then goats and then pigs and chickens and ducks and whatever." And it's just this multi-species grazing. And don't get me wrong, amazing, do it, right? We do it. With the farms we manage do it. An amazing thing. That's not biodiversity, right? That's just controlling the number of species that occupy a landscape. Biodiversity can't include control. You can't control biodiversity because you can't hold it because it's always moving. Right. Resilience is diversity and motion. How, like, try to pick up a snake, right? And you can only hold on to it for so long before it's just going to beat you. And it's going to beat you by running away and slither. Like, you can't hold on to goo or glitter or snakes or pick your substance, right? Like, there's a certain finite end to the human's control of something. And there's a finite end. Biodiversity is very early, right? So we talk about multi-species, but we also talk about cover crops. Like we do a lot of consulting. We consulted on over 100,000 acres of land last year, all across the United States. Our team did, me and about 3 or 4 other guys or people. And when you show up to a farm and they say, "Oh, wow, look at this field. I planted it in 19 different species of cover crops. Look how biodiverse it is." And it's like, yeah, I get you. But you did that, right? And so as long as you're able to assert control over the thing, you have done something. And this is the original point I wanted to make. Whether or not you're saying biodiversity is multi-species grazing or biodiversity is 19 different species of cover crops, your ability to control has done one thing. It has separated you from the system. If I can control you, I'm not you.
Right.
Because there's an I and there's a you, and I can control. If I can control biodiversity, I am not an aspect of the biodiversity. And now we have created a system of diversion, right? Of bifurcated realities. It's a linear reductionist system. It can't be holistic. Regeneration, to truly be regenerative, has to be, I don't want to use this term incorrectly and make it pertain to too much of the social justice sphere, but it has to be inclusive. It has to be the all of us. The butterflies, the crown beard, the good tasting grasses for cattle, the bad tasting grasses for cattle, me and you and these thoughts. Don't forget about that. There's a whole other dimension here, these thoughts and all of this is one thing, right? In Dark Cloud Country, my recent book, I say, we do not have relationship. We are the relationship. We don't harmonize. We are the harmony. And until we understand that, until we release control, biodiversity can never exist because it's always going to be a human construct. And as long as it is a human construct, humanity is not that which is constructed. And now we have a decadent human species living in a world that they control. And because it's more abundant than a degenerating environment, we call it regenerative, right? Right. But when we took over, I'm using air quotes here, when we took over Timshall Wildland here, when we moved to this farm, whatever it was, a decade ago, we did a large biological study, a survey it's called, a biological assay, technically is the biological term for it. But we just basically documented every species we could find. That's what we did. There were 5 species, vegetative species in every pasture. No trees, just 5 vegetative species. It was like tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, Johnson grass, whatever. Just very bland, commercial species, 5 of them. Like maybe there was a horse nettle, like a really noxious, quote unquote, weed. Call it a wonderful friend, or 4, but weed is good enough for now. There was 5. The point is 5. We did the same biological assay a couple years ago, and we found 73 species, vegetative species, are now in the landscape. And we didn't do anything. And I will tell you that while I look at this and I get excited, it also makes me feel like an idiot. I didn't do any of that. I didn't plan any of it. I didn't plant any of it. We didn't control any of it. That is natural succession or emergence in a system that is undulating with diversity, which means constantly moving, right? And next year there's going to be more, or maybe there's going to be less. Resilience is diversity and motion. I did not say it was positive motion, right? Again, resilience is diversity and motion. It doesn't have to be positive, not from our eyes, right? And there's trees everywhere, and there's shrubs everywhere, and there's think we identified like 20 something different species of grasses, and there's like 30 some different types of wildflowers. Like we just have pictures of our kids. They're four, or I'm sorry, they're five. Now they're 4 and 2. So they're very young. And they're just running in the springtime and in the autumn, the two flowering seasons here in Central Virginia, through these fields of wildflowers that you would look at and you're like, how do you have cows out here? What do they eat? And I will tell you, I don't know. Humbly, I will tell you, I have no idea what they eat, but they continue to be fat, and we continue to have more diversity that they are not eating. I was talking to one botanist from the University of Ontario recently, and he claimed that in order for a grass to be truly nourishing to an herbivore, that grass needs to be supported by 20 different forbs and legumes. So forbs are tasty to cows. Legumes are tasty to cows. Some of them, they're palatable. It's a term we use in this industry. Palatable, not tasty, palatable. Forbs are not. Very little forbs are ever even nibbled on by cattle. And so that doesn't make sense, right? If you were thinking about diversity, right? When I plan out a 19 species cover crop, right? I'm not saying I'm going to plant one species the cows will eat and 19 species the cows won't eat, but those 19 species are going to help the one. No, I'm not physically able to do that, because why? Even if I desired it, you listen to this podcast and you're like, damn it, this dude is interesting. Or maybe you say, damn it, this dude's an idiot. You send me a mean email. Don't worry, spam filters will read them. I don't read these things. But you say, damn it, maybe this guy is interesting. And then you go out and you plant, 100 species cover crop, right? And you're like, now everybody be friends, right? Like the forbs and legumes help the grasses and whatever. You can't even do that, even if you desire, because you are not a part. What I mean by that is apart from, separate from the system, right? You're going to try to exit yourself from the natural world, to go buy the seeds, to ship them, 3,000 miles from Northwest Oregon from a monocropped white clover field, right? Because everybody always thinks when we're talking about cover crops that like there's these native wildflower meadows where like wild fairies and butterflies fly around harvesting all of the diversified, seeds when a purchase order comes. Like no, it's a 1,000-acre white clover monocrop. It just isn't corn, right? Because it's white clover, we're not angry about it. It's mechanized harvests and everything else. Anyways, that's another side point. But the point is, you can't go out, buy those seeds, regenerative or not, organic or not, bring them in, plant them, and now say, you 20 forbs and legumes, you nourish this piece of grass, and you 20 forbs and legumes over there, like you nourish that piece of grass. Right? That this is an intrinsic relationship that we don't understand, and neither should we. So you can't plan for it. You can't design it. All you can do is inhabit it. Like one way that I would like us to discuss the regenerative movement today, if we have to use this terminology, is call it a return. The regenerative movement is a return. It is a return to what? Habitation. Like inhabit the damn thing, right? Like meet your neighbors, sit out into a field and just be like, man, like, what do you want to be? Like, if you're listening to this podcast and you're in agriculture in any way, like, when was the last time you walked into a pasture, a field, a meadow, a hayfield, a forest, whatever it was, and looked around and you said, oh, okay, what do you want to be? I never asked, right? It's just you're a field, and so now you're a field full of grasses that are palatable to fatten cattle, because that's how I make money. And that field would look at you and say, what is money? And you're going to say, well, it's this thing that we created so we can feed ourselves. And you're going to say, okay, so you eat money. And you say, no, field, we don't eat money. We use the money to buy things that we can't eat, right? And then the field is going to say, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? The sun shines and we eat, right? The sun shines, we then begin to eat. We throw down roots into the soil, and we pull up minerals. I'm not saying that socialism needs to exist politically, right, for humans. But what I am saying is the meadow doesn't care about your political, social, communal construct of capitalism or socialism or money or currency or whatever, right? It doesn't. And so as you utilize those mediums to regenerate, right? And this is the issue. This is where people get really angry. We have to realize that we are using systems that are extra world. They're how do you say this? They're not, I don't want to say they're extraterrestrial, because now we think of aliens, but they're not of this world, right? We created these things, right? Nature doesn't care. Like if you're rich and I'm poor, nature doesn't care, if we're on the same land base and you're rich and I'm poor, nature doesn't care, right? If you're on a different, this doesn't mean anything. Like I realize to buy land, you have to have money. To pay your property tax, you have to have money. Money is implicit to the system. I get it. And I'm not saying anything against that, right? It's impossible, right? Just like you and I having a conversation about all of these huge things like climate change. It doesn't matter, right? It's just the climate is the climate. It controls 8 billion, people's lives. Like, what are you and I going to do about the thing? We can live better lives. Now we are inhabiting again, right?
Mm.
It is not to be concerned with feeding the world. Okay. And that's where we go back to this. We have to inhabit. And when we inhabit our place, when we work locally, when we understand that nutrient rich soil producing nutrient dense beef or plants or pork or tomatoes or whatever can only happen in place when that plant is inhabiting that soil, when that piece of sunlight, right, that marvelous starlight with its thermal energy radiating the earth, that piece hits that plant in that soil in that regenerative relationship. And now I think that word matters. That is a regenerative relationship, meaning that it is regenerating life. The life is being used, it is nourishing, it is now dying, it is going through a chaotic rebirth process into a new birth process, and it's being regenerated, recycled. But now we kind of think blue garbage cans and plastic, so stay away from that word. But it's a cycle, right?
Right.
A regeneration is a cycle. That's all it is. Birth, life, growth, death, chaos, rebirth. That is the regenerative cycle. I throw chaos in there because I just wrote Dark Cloud Country is basically the claim that we've forgotten about chaos in the regenerative cycle. But if you're interested,
Wait,
read the
no,
book.
absolutely.
The point is in habit. And stop me, please.
No, no, you're good. When you talk about inhabit, that makes me think about disrupting the way humans think that they're going to mimic nature and they're going to plant cover crops in the way that nature would do it. Is that kind of what you were talking about? Like we can't, as a human, we can't mimic nature.
No. I think so like we were talking before this, I'm 30 years old, so I'm not entirely that old. But I think the greatest thing I've ever learned in my life, and I give this to everyone freely. This is the greatest bit of wisdom I've ever acquired. This is it. It's that I am horrible at quote unquote regenerating this earth. I am so bad at growing grass. I am so bad at building soil. I am so bad at planting trees that grow. Like every tree I plant dies, right? I am incapable of going into a field and regenerating it. I am incapable of it. Now listen, okay? Cows are very good at it. Sheep, goats, herbivores, right? More natural. Pronghorns to bison to elk to moose. Very good at it. Okay? But that is okay. That is wonderfully okay. Will Harris down in White Oak pastures in South Georgia has this phrase that I love. Is that nature abhors a vacuum or an open space. Now I forget it. Like I said, my memory is never the greatest,
I've
but
heard it,
nature
yeah.
abhors a vacuum or whatever. And it's true. But what that statement implies, I think, is more true. And that is this. Life fills holes. Okay. What that means is that life fills holes with particular aspects of life. Okay. Saying that a different way, if you dig a hole, it will fill up in time with dirt over the many thousands, if not millions of years, depending on the depth of the hole. But water will fill it up first. Water seems to be the life that fills the niche of an open earth. Okay. Humans, we are not good at regenerating the earth. We are not good at it at all. In fact, I would venture to say that we are really not supposed to. That's not our genius. Our genius, in my opinion, is to be a symphony conductor. So now, I don't know if you've ever been to a symphony or an orchestra or opera or something, or maybe went to a play where there was a live orchestra. But the symphony conductor has his back to the audience. It's typically a he, I realize, but I should say they. They have their back to the audience. You don't even know if they're a male or a female. You don't know what their face looks like. You never see them until the end. You just see their hands going. But you hear unbelievable music. Now, that's not the richest part. The richest part to me is that this, generally speaking, the symphony's conductor did not write thus music. Right? Bach, Beethoven, Vivaldi probably wrote this music, or some other composer. So not only is their back to you, not only can you not determine the individual characteristics of that individual, right? Other than if they're tall or they're small or if their hair is long or short. Like you can tell very few things about them. But the beauty that you interact with, right, with your senses all around you, let's call it Vivaldi's Four Seasons, orchestra, or whatever you want to call it, symphony. They didn't even write the damn thing. It's not even theirs. So the beauty isn't theirs. They're not playing the violins or the cellos or the whatever, the trombone. Like the musical instruments playing those notes are not even theirs. The music isn't even theirs. The ideas aren't even theirs. Their back is to you. They don't even have identity until the end, right? Until the end. Humanity, in my opinion, and maybe this isn't our role forever, but I think especially in the modern century where people are so put in boxes, we are told, the world is dying, but big business is here to help, right? You're struggling and I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? Same phrase, same unbelievably like chilling phrase, like Nestle's going to save us, right? Making regeneration a label that can be slapped on a product that is produced in Montana, flown to Texas, then tripped to, Virginia to cruise 8,000 miles, where FedEx or, ABF Food Distribution Company makes all of the money, right? Like that's going to save the world. This is what regenerative ag is. No. It's just colonization, it's control, it's mechanization of life with the regenerative label slapped on it, right? Like in the 1920s, we had the emergence of what I call the industrial food system, the machine, if you will. We were trying to produce as much corn or bushels of corn per acre than we ever have because we were trying to feed the world. Right, we were emerging out of the war era of the 1910s ish. 1919 obviously is the year, but we were emerging out of the post-World War I era. We were emerging into the new stage of industrialism. We don't know this at the time, but we're about to kill 38,000 people a day for like 7 years straight in World War II. Like it was a time of great shift. I'm not blaming 1920 for the emergence of monocrop degenerative desertification via this concept, but that's really when it began. 1920 was the production of more corn or more bushels of corn per acre. In 2020, we have the exact same thing happening with carbon. It's not bushels of corn now, it's carbon. We're trying to sequester as many tons of carbon per acre as possible. So in 1920, it was corn. In 2020, it's carbon. Same paradigm, same worldview, same assertion of control and colonization for a good reason, right? Feed the world with corn. Let the world breathe with a lack of carbon in the atmosphere, right? These are two really good goals. But now we occupy a different thing. It's weird. We've kind of gotten out of carbon. The carbon market still exists, but they're not talked about as much. Now this regenerative space is being courted, if you will, by big business who are like Nestle, who are really interested by 2030 to transition their quote unquote supply chains to regenerative. Now, by the way, a little aside, I did a little air quotes there when I said supply chains. You can never make a supply chain regenerative. The word supply chains, the linguistic creation of that phrase is can never be associated with something that says relationship, right? A supply chain is extractive. It has to be, right? And it has to happen on a P&L, right? I have to get more than I gave. That's profit, right? That's the definition of profit. And I'm not saying profit is bad. What I am saying is it's extractive. So it depends on the context in which the profit happens, right? That's where it's either good or bad. But profit is extractive. It has to. I have to spend less. I have to give less than I make, than I get. Supply chains demand profit. Supply chains demand production, right? None of these things can be based in relationships of a place where all of the nutrients are cycled locally. Like that doesn't mean no supply chain can exist there. So anyways, Nestle wants to transition their supply chain over to regenerative. And again, big business, we're here to help. And now what we see in the local setting, it's not corn, it's not carbon, but in 2022, 2023, what we've worked around, what we've truly witnessed with front row seats, which is what the article speaks about, is this concept that now, as a regenerative farmer, the only way to make it is to get big or get out. Which is not a new phrase, right? We've been using this phrase in the American dairy industry for decades upon decades upon decades. You got to get big or you got to get out. it imbues many other industries as well. It is not a unique term to agriculture. And what I mean by get big or get out is this. Right now in the state of Virginia, which has more cattle than human beings. Okay, so we're a heavily farmed. Okay, like Kentucky is the same way. I imagine Texas is maybe close. But there's a couple key rural agricultural states in the East. Kentucky and Virginia are two of them. Two of them. There's more. We have more cattle than human beings. Right now, as a regenerative farmer, okay, and I use that in the old use of the term, kind of forget we've talked about maybe the reduction or complete eradication of that term. But as a regenerative farmer, I can make more money selling into the conventional cattle yard over in Stanton, Virginia, about an hour over the mountain, than I can selling to a verified regenerative, grass-born, grass-fed, grass-finished CPG company, right? Consumer packaged good company. Now listen, I said this recently, and one of these CPG companies sat me down and yelled at me for 2 hours because they were offended that I would make them look so bad. But I mean, it's just true. Okay, look at the math. And I can show you the math. Like if you're interested in the math, email me. I'll just give you the math. Run the math and you see that I am saying a black and white truth. I very rarely talk in this space. Very rarely do I get out of poetry, do I get out of philosophy, do I get out of Socratic type reasoning and occupy the space of like 1 + 1 = 2. Very rarely. But let me do it here. You make more money, okay, selling to the conventional cattle sale yard, whatever it's called, in Stanton, Virginia, than you do selling to a CPG company, which sells to the end consumer a packaged good of just 100% grass-fed, grass-finished, verified regenerative ground beef, right? For $10.99 a pound. The farmer makes less money when the consumer does that than if the consumer goes to the local cattle yard, right, and pays $2 a pound for the damn thing. That's crazy. So not only are big brands domineering the regenerative word now, the regenerative space, but they're also forcing farmers, even at scale, to become what I call paupers and prostitutes. That's what the farmer is becoming. Because now the only way the farmer makes money, okay, if they go the verified regenerative, grass-fed and grass-finished CPG route, and if you're wondering what the hell is a CPG company, Paleo Valley is one of these. I can talk of Paleo Valley. I can talk of a number of them, but unfortunately they'll just sit me down again and yell at me. Okay, but like Paleo Valley, we can yell at them. So Paleo Valley is that. So we make less money selling to Paleo Valley than we do the conventional cattle yard. Now make sure, this is very important. What does it mean to be able to sell to the local cattle yard? There's 3 qualifications a farmer has to meet in order to sell to the local cattle yard. Because if I sell to Paleo Valley, let's say, or a CPG company, to leave everybody unnamed, it has to be grass-fed and finished, right? It has to be verified regenerative, which means that I have to be building soil, increasing quote unquote biodiversity, doing all of these things. There's a lot of stuff there, right? Years and years and years and years of data and collecting it and farming and carrying and moving. Like there's a lot of stuff there to be a regenerative farmer. Air quotes, of course. If I bring them to the local cattle yard, I have to meet three requirements. Hold it up too. I mean three requirements. Number 1, the cow has to be alive. The cow has to have locomotive abilities, and the cow can have an active bacterial infection. That's it. And I'm going to make more money than selling a 3-year soil building, biodiversity increasing, polywire moving, grass-fed and finished cow to the end consumer at $10.99. This is not a system I'm in. This is not regeneration. This is robbery. This is highwaymen. This is turning farmers into paupers and prostitutes. And I'm not saying local farmers. I'm saying big farmers. So if the mantra is get big or get out, but if you get big, you turn into a pauper or a prostitute, right? Then what is the option? You have to go the opposite route. And what is the opposite route? You now have to, and I use this word intentionally, you have to slum it up at the local farmers market. And what do I mean by that? Farmers today, we did a survey 2 years ago. We surveyed almost 1,000 farms under the acreage, I think 500 or 800 acres. I can't remember. We asked them a whole network of questions, an unbelievably large survey. Local farmers, regenerative, conventional, I don't care, as long as you're under 500 or 800 acres. Again, I forget that ceiling. And we learned 3 unbelievable things. Your local farmers are working 87 hours a week farming on average, 37 additional hours a week marketing, and they make $18,000 a year total. That is like pre-tax, pre-mortgage, pre-liability insurance. That's pre-fuel, right? Like that's just cash flow with a little bit of money, like cost of goods sold is what we took out of that. So like if you pay $300 a year to raise a steer, we take that out. Direct expenses, what I would just call, generally speaking, cost of goods sold. So you make $18,000 a year. So now you get big and you lose money because you can't sell it to regenerative CPG and you can't sell it to the conventional market. You get small and you live on, number one, you work more than 100 hours a week. And number two, you make $18,000 a year. So you are below the lower threshold of the poverty line. Okay, so what's the option? Now, listen, I do want to say you have food. You live below the poverty line, but you have food and you have land. So there's a little bit of privilege there, and we can't dismiss that entirely. But generally speaking very simply, that is, you are below the poverty line. You you can't send your kids to college for that. You
Right.
can't buy a new car. You can't even buy an old car for that. You can't even buy a 20-year. Like you have very limited economic access. And so what do? Right? That's the question. What do we do? If this is the story we inhabit, and yet this story is regenerative, what do we do? And so this has been our work for the last 2 or 3 years. We came to this realization maybe 3 years ago that we were at a farmer's market, my wife and I, we were in the farmer's market booth. And this is why I say slumming it up at the local farmer's market. We were there and this individual walked up to us and our good and dear friends were in a booth next to us. Livestock farm, raised the exact same, I mean, just unbelievable farm. We're regenerative, quote unquote. They're regenerative, quote unquote. Amazing farm, great people, dear friends, best friends, best family friends we have. And somebody walked up and they raised chicken. We raised chicken at the time. And somebody walked up and said, why should I buy your chicken as opposed to Verdant Acres chicken over there? And we were like, John, Mary, Verdant, like, could you guys just walk away for a second? Let me just what do you want me to do? Right? Because
Right.
it's cheaper. So we're going to financially race to the bottom, right? Mine is cheaper than theirs. And so in order to make the sale, now theirs has to be cheaper than, we're just going to race to the bottom. Or do I have to insult them? Verdant Acres, they're just not as good. We're just better, right? So now we have to be this weird combative destroyers of relation. Like, come on, that's what we're gonna do, right? Because when you go to the farmer's market as a consumer, and you go to a market where there's more than 2 or 3 different producers, so it's not an infinitely small market. 3 producers is, whatever. Let's just say that's small. You have to make a decision. Who are you gonna buy from? Everybody there, or a lot of the people there, are raising grass-fed and finished ground beef or beef, and it's packaged as ground. Like they all have access. Like you can easily get good ground beef from all of them, or most of them. So who are you going to buy from? The one that's nicer, the one that costs less. So you're going to participate in the race to the bottom, right? But oh no, I like the way those people look better, right? So now we're going to turn. Like, come on, like I could run this for an hour. We could do an entire podcast and me just running through this, hypothetical situation. But the point is, we have to, as consumers and the producers, create a system of participation that allows habitation, right? That allows everyone to re-inhabit. Like I said, I wish we would call the regenerative movement just the return. Everybody just returns and they just re-inhabit their local system where farmers are not rugged individualists, right? Like every farm doesn't own their farm or their land, right? But we all work together. And I'm not saying everybody has to co-own land legally. What I'm saying is we work together and we start there. Maybe we start to co-own land legally, and that might be a really great, but start somewhere, right? Start working together locally, because what's really interesting, when COVID happened, March, April, and May of early 2020, everybody started turning locally, especially here in Virginia. I think it happened all over the country. Yep. All the consumers started to consume their food locally because that's all they could get. Everything else was sold out. And what local regenerative farms realized was our farm, Verdant Acres, everybody I know, we lost all of our inventory that we had stored all winter long in 2 weeks. Like we were not, like you and I sit on this podcast and I don't know, I don't know everything about you, but we sit here and we're like, regenerative food, local farms, support local. And then as soon as a portion of our populace did, for 3 months, we died. We were so ill prepared, right? Like if everybody started using the metro or everybody started flying, we can't have a mass populace turn to the local system and expect to be fed. It's impossible. Not because it is impossible logistically, Okay. But it's impossible from a current opportunity perspective. Local farmers are only raising the meat that they think they can sell. They only have so much access to capital to raise that food. I shouldn't say meat in particular, but food in general. There's a lot of holes there. And so what we did 3 years ago, we started an organization called Commons Provisions. Commons Provisions is a network of over 35 different local farms. We verify them as regenerative, which I wish we would change this word a little bit. But basically, we go through multiple year biological assays of their land base. We measure their soil, we measure their carbon, we measure the biodiversity, we measure all of these different leading and lagging indicators from mineral cycling to nutrient density to nutrient richness in the soil, so that all of the producers in that network, all of the farmers, have demonstrated that year over year over year, ecologically, their land is healing. Healing at a particular pace, so that now when you as the consumer buy meat from our collective, you're not just supporting 35 different farms at the exact same fucking time, right? Like
Right.
that's not just what you're doing, but you're doing that. But you're also knowing that you're getting the best local food possible, while also by doing that, by participating, realize you're not consuming. When you participate in that system, you are able to pour money into 35 different farms with data that can now take that data, the verified regenerative data that we got of their soil and everything else, and we can now take that money, pour it back onto those farms so that they can get better, right? Like the number of farms that I've met over my consulting lifetime, the last, let's say, half decade, that really wanted to be regenerative but didn't have the finances available to allow that regeneration to take place. Infinite,
Hmm.
infinite, almost everybody,
Wow.
right? Very few people who own land or have access to land are like, you know what? Fuck it. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear in this
No,
podcast, but
please
I'm
do.
emotional. But they're just like, fuck it. You know, like I hate land, I hate people, let's just kill people. I'm gonna destroy this and cause it to erode. Fuck it. Like that's almost nobody,
Right.
right? What they lack is understanding, which in our modern or technology, or they lack manpower, right? Or they whatever it is. Like they maybe there's a portion of them that lack enough pain to have their eyes open. Like there's some spiritual stuff, like whatever. But the point is, the number of people's the number of farmers whose lives would change if they had access to the $2,000 course that I'm teaching next week is infinite. $2,000. That's it. And so I've been talking for a long time, but let me end with this. And maybe you have questions, maybe you don't, but let me end with this very simply. What does the consumer do? Okay. I've been up here. I've used very little math, but I've been up here poetically philosophizing about these big things. What does the consumer do, right, with this information? And let me be perfectly clear. What I advise is this: look down at your feet and start there. Find the closest local farm. Okay. Go visit them. Maybe call them first. They're busy. Don't take their time. They're working 87 hours a week and 37 hours a week marketing and only making $18,000 a year. Don't take their time, but walk over to them, generally speaking, and just ask, how can I help? Don't ask if they're regenerative. Don't ask about carbon. Don't ask about the species of their cows. Don't ask if they like regeneration or the future of the Dust Bowl. Like, don't ask them any other question. Okay. And don't look for the most closest farm as regenerative. Like, don't type in local regenerative farms near me. Type in local farms near me. Right. And then just show up. Don't ask them these deeper questions about nutrient density or grass fed and finished or regeneration. Just ask, how can I help? Because maybe what they tell you will surprise you.
Hmm.
Maybe. For instance, hey man, I've really wanted to be regenerative for years. My wife died of cancer. This is a true story. Hey, I really wanted to be regenerative for years. My wife died of cancer, but I simply don't understand how I'm supposed to stop spraying glyphosate. I don't understand the process in which I need to undergo. This individual needed moments of of a intelligent, scientist's mind, right? Or they needed to go to a $1,000 course or a $400 weekend conference, right? Like that's it. Well, you as the consumer, you might have $400. Don't think that supporting local farms is you buying their food. It might be that, but it might not necessarily be that. Just ask, how can you help? Maybe they need volunteers. Maybe they need just a little bit of money to go to that conference so they can learn how to stop spraying glyphosate, right? Maybe they need an investment of $5,000 so they can put up the fence lines and waterers they finally need to start rotationally grazing their herd. Maybe they need a herd. They have land, but they have no herd, but you've always wanted to farm. So now you're just going to use their land for free and work with like the opportunities that exist when we inhabit or re-inhabit or return to the local landscape. Stop asking bifurcating questions, right? Don't ask if they're regenerative. Don't bifurcate farmers into degenerative and regenerative. What a ridiculous thing to do, right? Just as if you were to go to the hospital and the doctor's like, well, your liver is shit, but your kidney is good. Go home. You're fine. Nobody would do this, but we do it, right? Like, I'm regenerative. My neighbor is not. Therefore, he's an asshole and I'm not. No. We share the same aquifer. We share the same species. My tree's roots go over there. His tree roots go over here. We are connected. We are the kidney and the liver. We both need to rise unless we all will fall. And so don't ask bifurcating questions. Just simply ask, what can I do? What do you need help with? And then just see what they say.
Man, I think that's a perfect place to end. I have to jump on a meeting here in the next 4 minutes. But man, I feel like we need to do a part 2 of this. Would you be up for that?
Anytime, brother. I've enjoyed it. I apologize. I know you need to go. But
no.
That's
perfect.
I ramble.
No. This
I
is.
hope my rambling was well received.
No, I greatly appreciate it. This is a great conversation, and one that is refreshing because it's not the common narrative that gets spouted, in the regenerative community. So, would you be open for a part 2 of this?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
That'd be perfect.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'll reach back out in a couple days. I appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too, man. Bye.